5 inmates, 2 homemade shanks, 1 cornered warden with no way out. This is how a maximum security prison riot in Seoul turns into a massacre until a new prisoner sees it. She's in an orange jumpsuit. She's facing a life sentence for a crime she didn't commit, and she's about to change everything. Her name is Amara Oak. 38 hours earlier, she was transferred into his prison, a former close protection officer for the Nigerian president, now convicted of an assassination plot on Korean soil. The evidence was perfect. The case was airtight, and every piece of it was a lie. Now, Warden Park Young-Hwan has seconds to live, and the only person who can save him is the woman he's supposed to keep locked away forever. Park Young-Hwan took the warden's post at Dongbu Correctional 3 years ago, a former military police captain who believed a prison should be a clock, every gear precise, every tick predictable. He inherited a facility notorious for gang control and corruption. His first act was to fire 7 guards. His second was to install new cameras in every blind spot the old warden had conveniently ignored. He ran a quiet prison until the transfer orders came. The file for inmate 7490 landed on his desk on a Tuesday. Amara Oak, Nigerian, age 29, formerly Presidential Security Brigade Abuja, currently convicted of conspiracy to commit assassination on a visiting Korean trade minister. Sentence, life without parole. The evidence annex was thick. Forensic reports on a weapon traced to her. CCTV stills placing her at a meetup. Witness testimony from a confidential informant inside her unit. It was, as the prosecutor's cover note stated, an open and shut case of a protection officer going rogue. Young-Hwan's job was to store her, not to judge, but a detail snagged. The motive box was empty, not classified, just blank. 4,000 miles away and 2 years earlier, Captain Amara Oak stood at the shoulder of President Bola Ademi. Her eyes never rested. Her posture was a lesson in controlled potential. She had trained for this since she was 18, rising through an all-male unit on sheer, uncompromising skill. Her reputation was for seeing threats nobody else did, which is why, on the night of November 12th, she saw the setup unfolding in real time. The minister's visit was a high-stakes negotiation for rare earth mineral rights. The security detail was a joint operation. Amara was the liaison. 40 minutes before the motorcade departure, her direct superior, Colonel Dyke, handed her a sidearm. Not your standard issue, lighter, better for close quarters in the venue. The gun felt wrong. The balance was off. She ran the serial number through her private database. It was listed as destroyed in an armory fire 6 months prior. When she confronted Dyke, he smiled. "You're too thorough for your own good, Oak." The arrest was swift. The charge, attempting to smuggle a weapon to assassinate the Korean minister. The evidence, the gun in her hand, her fingerprints, and Colonel Dyke's testimony that she had requested it. At her trial, the CCTV footage showed her taking the weapon. It did not show Dyke handing it to her. The digital logs placing the gun at the armory fire were declared corrupted. The one witness from her squad who would testify to her character was reassigned to a remote post the day before. She was sentenced in a Korean court under a bilateral security agreement. The news cycle lasted a week. Rogue agent betrays trust. The story was too plain, too convenient for anyone to question. Warden Park read the transfer manifest. 1 female inmate, high risk, international. She would be the only foreign woman in a block of 200. He ordered her placed in solitary for the first 48 hours. Standard procedure, a cooling-off period. What he didn't order was the beating. On her first night, 2 guards entered her cell. They said nothing. One held her while the other used a rubber baton. Precise strikes. Ribs, kidneys, stomach, professional. They left her on the floor. The message was not from the warden. It was from the system that had already convicted her. She curled on the concrete, breath whistling through a cracked rib, and she did not cry out. She mapped the cameras in the ceiling. One was dark, a blind spot. The next morning, Park did his rounds. He saw her through the meal slot. She was sitting upright on her bunk, back straight, eyes forward. The bruise on her temple was a dark bloom against her skin. He knew. He had seen guards like his before in the military, men who believed justice included their own personal tax. He transferred the 2 guards to a different block that afternoon, a meaningless gesture. The damage was done. But when he looked back through the slot, her eyes met his. Not pleading, not angry, assessing. She was reading him like a threat diagram. He was the first variable in a new, hostile environment. He closed the slot, unnerved. Meanwhile, in the general population, a different clock was ticking. A prison gang called the Jindal, the Steel Knives, controlled the contraband flow. Park's crackdown had choked their revenue. Their leader, an inmate named Jun Seo, had a plan, a riot, not a spontaneous outburst, a surgical instrument. Cause chaos, take guards hostage, negotiate for reinstatement of old privileges. And they needed a catalyst. They needed the warden dead or captured. The order went out to a corrupt guard on their payroll. Make sure the West Gate control panel fails during the next shift change. Park's prison was a clock, but someone was about to throw a wrench into the gears. Amara was moved to the general population after her solitary confinement. The women's block was a world of whispered alliances and sharp glances. She kept to herself. She observed the rhythm of guards, the patterns of movement, the way a particular officer, Sergeant Kim, always lingered near cell 12. She saw money change hands. She saw the tension building like atmospheric pressure. In the yard, she heard snippets. When it pops, you stay in your cell. The Jindal are moving. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood the tone. Mutiny. 2 days before the riot, Park received an anonymous note in his office. It was slipped under his door. It read, "Check the Westgate hydraulic line." He dismissed it. An inmate trying to cause trouble. He had 100 such notes every month. He ordered a routine check. The report came back, systems functional. The report was filed by Sergeant Kim. The day of the riot started normal. Roll call, breakfast, work detail. At 2:17 in the afternoon, the fire alarm in C Block blared, not a drill. The West Gate, the primary security choke point, shuddered and froze half open. And then the clock shattered. Inmates poured into the central corridor. Makeshift weapons appeared from hiding places. Guards were overwhelmed, pulled into cells. The Jindal had their chaos. Warden Park was in his central office when the alarm sounded. He grabbed his radio. Static, then screaming. He drew his baton and rushed toward the sound. His protocol was to secure the control room. To get to it, he had to cross the west yard. It was a trap. 5 Jindal members, armed with shanks made from cafeteria trays, were waiting for him. They cornered him against a service door that wouldn't open. His radio was dead. His baton was useless against 5 blades. This was the plan. Capture the warden, use him as a bargaining chip. He saw Amara then. She was 30 feet away, pressed against a wall by the surge of bodies, their eyes locked. He saw her glance at the 5 men, at his position, at the dead end behind him. He saw her calculate, and then he saw her push off the wall. She didn't scream, she didn't yell. She moved, 4 strides, a sidestep that slipped her past a swinging pipe, and she planted herself between the warden and the closest shank. Her hands came up not in a boxer's stance but low and open, a protector's stance. The lead inmate, a man named Tseok, grinned. He saw a woman in an orange jumpsuit. He didn't see a former presidential guard who had trained to disarm attackers with guns, knives, and bombs. His thrust was clumsy, angry. Amara's parry was economical. She caught his wrist, used his momentum to spin him, and drove his own arm down, forcing the shank from his grip. It clattered on the concrete. The other 4 hesitated. This wasn't in the script. Inmates didn't protect wardens. Tseok scrambled back, clutching his wrist. Amara didn't advance. She held her ground, her body a shield in front of Park. Her eyes tracked all 5 men. "Back up," she said in clear, if accented, Korean, the command voice, the one she used on motorcade details. It cut through the riot noise. One of the younger inmates, fueled by chaos and pride, lunged, not at the warden, at her. The shank was aimed at her throat. Park shouted a warning that died in the din. Amara shifted. The blade meant for her neck caught her high on the shoulder, tearing through the jumpsuit and biting deep. She grunted, a short, sharp exhalation of air, but her countermove didn't stop. Her good arm snaked around the attacker's neck, applying pressure to the carotid. He went limp in 3 seconds. She dropped him, stepped over his body, the blood now spreading in a dark bloom across her shoulder. She stared down the remaining 3. "Next," she said, her voice flat. That's when the backup arrived. Guards in riot gear, summoned from the unaffected East Block, flooded the corridor. The Jindal members scattered, swallowed by the chaos they'd created. In seconds, the immediate threat was over. Park Jung-hwan was left standing against the wall, unharmed, staring at the back of the woman who had saved him. She slowly turned. Her face was pale, beaded with sweat from the pain, but her expression was calm. Assessed. Mission complete. Then her knees buckled. Park caught her before she hit the ground. He yelled for a medic. He applied pressure to her shoulder with his own hand, feeling the warm blood seep through his fingers. The sirens wailed. The riot was being suppressed all around them, but in that pocket of sudden calm, the warden and the inmate were locked in a silence louder than any alarm. He looked from her wound to her face. "Why?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She met his eyes. "You are a person in danger," she said simply, as if stating a fundamental law of physics. Then her eyes closed. The infirmary was a secured wing, now the quietest place in the prison. Amara Oak lay on a cot, shoulder stitched and bandaged, under the watch of 2 guards, sedated but stable. Warden Park stood outside the glass partition, his uniform shirt stained with her blood. He replayed the last 60 seconds in a loop. The efficiency of her movement, the tactical choice to disarm, not to maim, the command voice. This wasn't just a trained person. This was a professional of the highest order. The kind of person his own government would hire to protect dignitaries. Not the kind of person who makes clumsy assassination plots. The note under his door flashed in his mind. Check the West Gate hydraulic line. He had dismissed it. He walked to his office, now a command post buzzing with damage reports, 43 injured, 12 guards hospitalized, no fatalities, a miracle they were saying. He closed his door and opened the file for Inmate 7490 again. He read past the prosecutor's summary. He read the witness statements. Only one, Colonel Emeka Dyke. He read the forensic report on the gun. A single set of prints, hers. He looked at the CCTV stills, grainy images of a woman in uniform accepting a weapon from a man whose face was turned away. He pulled up the trial transcript on his screen, searching for the section on motive. The prosecution argued it was financial, a bribe from a rival mining conglomerate, but no bank records were entered into evidence. No link was established. The judge had noted the unusual circumstantial thinness, but upheld the conviction based on the overwhelming physical evidence. Physical evidence that was just a gun and a photo. Park had seen enough military tribunals to smell a cover-up. This had the stench of one. He picked up the phone and called an old friend, a journalist named Minsu who worked the crime desk. "I need you to look into something. A Nigerian security officer convicted here 2 years ago, Amara Oak. See if anything smelled funny to anyone." Then he did something against every protocol. He went back to the infirmary, dismissed the guards for 5 minutes, and sat beside Amara's cot. She was awake, staring at the ceiling. "The note under my door, was that you?" he asked. She turned her head slowly. "No." "Do you know who it was?" She studied him, calculating the risk of truth. "A guard, Sergeant Jew. He processed my intake. He saw the beating. He is a good man in a bad place. He is also afraid." "Why warn me about the gate?" "Because he knew what it meant. He knows who controls Sergeant Kim." She paused, gathering strength. "My trial, it was a transaction. My former Colonel Dyke sold me. The Korean minister's life was never in danger. The deal for the mineral rights was, a rival company needed the minister to be scared, to need extra security, which they would provide through a subcontractor owned by Dyke's brother. I was the threat that never was, the excuse to charge a fortune for protection." Park felt the room tilt. "You're saying your entire conviction was a business strategy?" "I am saying I was the designated villain in a profit report," she said, her voice thick with sedation but clear with bitterness. "Colonel Dyke provided the asset me. The Korean prosecutor, someone whose name I never heard, provided the verdict. The evidence was manufactured. The witness was bought. The story was written before I ever touched that gun." "Why tell me this now?" "Because you asked why," she said, closing her eyes. "And because you are standing in a room with a woman who can barely lift her arm, surrounded by guards who follow orders, and you are the only one who listened." He left the infirmary, his mind reeling. He went to the personnel files. Sergeant Ju, young Min, 28 years old. Clean record. Park called him to his office. The young guard was visibly nervous. "The note," Park said, not as a question. Sergeant Ju's shoulders slumped. "I couldn't say it aloud, sir. They would know. But the Jindal paid Sergeant Kim 50,001 to disable the hydraulic line sensor. He showed me the money. He bragged about it. I saw Inmate Oak's file when she came in. I served in the military police too, sir. I know what a setup looks like. I thought if you checked the gate, you'd find the fault, you'd find Kim, you'd stop it all." He looked at the floor. "I was wrong." You were brave, Park corrected him quietly. Now I need you to be careful, go about your duties, say nothing. That night Park couldn't sleep. He opened the private server where the prison's camera footage was backed up. He typed in the date and time of Amara's intake and the beatings. He found the camera angle for the solitary cell corridor. He watched as the two guards entered. The footage had no audio, but the violence was unmistakable. He watched as they left. Then he saw something else. 10 minutes later, Sergeant Kim walked down the corridor. He didn't go into the cell. He stopped at the door, looked directly at the darkened camera, the blind spot, and smiled. Then he slipped a small wrapped object through the meal slot. Contraband, a reward for the guards, a message for Amara. The footage was time-stamped. It was evidence, not of her innocence, but of a conspiracy inside his own walls. He leaned back in his chair. The riot was over, but the war was just beginning. He had a choice. He could file his reports, cite inmate unrest, commend the guards who restored order, and let Amara Oak fade back into the machinery of permanent incarceration. Her story would be a footnote, an inmate injured during the suppression, or he could take the blood-stained shirt on his chair, the note in his drawer, and the footage on his screen, and start digging. To do that, he would have to betray the very system he swore to uphold. He would have to become the prisoner of his own conscience. Looked at the live feed from the infirmary on his second monitor. Amara was asleep. On the cot beside hers, a figure stirred. It was an older female inmate, whispering to Amara, checking her bandage, a small act of kindness in a place designed to crush it. Park made his decision. He picked up the phone and called his journalist friend again. Minsu, I'm sending you a file, and I need you to find a man, a Nigerian colonel named Emeka Dike. I need to know where his money comes from. He hung up and pulled a blank sheet of paper from his drawer. He began to write, not a report, but a timeline, one column for the official story, one column for the facts he was starting to uncover. The gap between them was a chasm, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. The pushback started within 24 hours. A formal complaint arrived from the Seoul Central Prosecutor's office, questioning Warden Park's irregular conduct during the riot and his excessive familiarity with a high-risk inmate. It was signed by a senior prosecutor named Choi, the same name that appeared on Amara's original conviction documents. Park's timeline now had a direct line from the Nigerian colonel to the Korean courtroom. He wasn't just fighting a cover-up. He was fighting the people who had engineered it. He met his journalist friend Minsu at a quiet cafe far from the prison. Minsu slid a folder across the table. Colonel Emeka Dike. He retired 6 months after Oak's conviction, not to a village, to a villa in Dubai. Bank records, courtesy of a source in the Nigerian anti-corruption unit, show a $7 million deposit into an offshore account 2 weeks after the trial concluded. The source company is a shell. But the shell is owned by another shell, which is ultimately owned by Hanwon Mineral Group. Park's blood went cold. Hanwon Mineral was the Korean conglomerate that had lost the original rare earth bid to the company that secured the deal after the minister's security scare. They paid Dike to frame his own officer, Park said, the pieces clicking into a horrifying mosaic. Gets worse, Minsu said, lowering his voice. The shell company that paid Dike also made a series of donations to a political fund. The fund's chairman is the brother of Prosecutor Choi. This isn't just business, it's a closed loop. They create a threat, sell the solution, and the justice system provides the pawn. Minsu tapped the folder. This is thermonuclear Jung Hwan. If you light this fuse, it blows back on powerful people, on prosecutors, on a billion-dollar corporation. Park took the folder. What about the witness, the one who testified against her? Disappeared, officially reassigned. My contact in Abuja thinks he's dead. A training accident. Minsu looked at his friend with concern. They clean up their messes. You're holding one of the last loose ends in your infirmary. Back at Dongbu, the atmosphere had shifted. Guards who used to nod now averted their eyes. Sergeant Kim wore a smug silence. Park knew he was being watched. He accessed the prison network from his office, pulling up the visitor logs for the past month. He saw a familiar name. An assistant from the prosecutor's office had visited Sergeant Kim 2 days before the riot, not to interview an inmate, to have a confidential meeting with a guard. The receipt was in the system. Park printed it. It was a tiny piece of the puzzle, but it placed the conspiracy inside his fence. He went to see Amara. She was in a secure medical cell now, deemed a flight risk due to her heightened profile. The shoulder wound was healing, but her eyes were hollow. "They are moving me," she said without preamble. An order came, transfer to a maximum security facility on Jeju Island in 3 days. It was a death sentence. Isolated on an island, far from his jurisdiction, any accident would be easy to explain. The transfer order had Prosecutor Choi's seal on it. This was their countermove: eliminate the evidence. "I won't let that happen," Park said, the defiance in his voice surprising even him. "You are one man," she said softly. "They are a system." That night, Park's personal phone rang, a blocked number, a distorted voice. "Warden Park, you have a distinguished career, a family, a daughter in middle school. It would be a shame for your digging to cause them embarrassment, or worse. Return to your duties. The inmate transfers. This is your only warning." The line went dead. They had found his personal number. They knew about his daughter. The threat was no longer professional. It was intimate. Paralyzed, he sat in the dark of his office. He looked at the photo on his desk of his daughter, Yoonjae, smiling in her school uniform. The chasm between the two columns on his timeline wasn't just a professional risk. It was an abyss that could swallow his entire life. He could file the transfer papers, go back to running his clock, and let the gears of the system grind Amara Oak into dust. He would be safe. His family would be safe. He opened the folder Min-soo had given him. He looked at the bank transfer, $7 million for a woman's life. He looked at the visitor log, a prosecutor meeting a corrupt guard. He thought of Amara taking a shank for him. He thought of her saying, "You are a person in danger." She had chosen to stand in the abyss. Could he do any less? He made 2 calls. The first was to his ex-wife. "Take Yoonjae to your mother in Busan for a week. Don't tell anyone where you're going." She asked why. He said, "Because I love you both." He hung up before she could argue. The second call was to Sergeant Ju. "I need a diversion tomorrow during laundry detail, and I need access to the evidence locker for inmate 7490. The next day at 2 p.m., a minor scuffle broke out in the laundry yard, orchestrated by Sergeant Ju. While all guards were distracted, Park used his master key to enter the secured evidence locker. Amara's personal effects from her arrest were stored there in a sealed box. He wasn't looking for proof of her guilt. He was looking for proof of her life. He found her personal phone, long dead, but taped inside the case was a micro SD card, a backup. A habit of a cautious security officer, he pocketed it. In his office, he inserted the card into a secure reader. It contained photos, videos, audio memos. There were videos of her team training, photos of her with her family, and then an audio file dated the night before her arrest. He pressed play. Amara's voice, hushed and urgent, filled the room. "Memo to self. Colonel Dyke is acting erratic. He ordered the team's comms switched to a private frequency for the minister's visit. He insisted I carry a non-issue sidearm. Serial number check comes back destroyed. I voiced my concern. He told me to remember who signs the checks. I believe the operation is compromised. I am making this record in case something happens to me. My name is Captain Amara Oak. My service number is Alpha Bravo 57902. I am loyal to my country and my duty. Whatever comes next, know that." Park stopped the recording. It was her testimony, recorded before the fact. It was the truth, frozen in time. This was the evidence that could crack the case open, but it was obtained illegally. It would never be admissible in a Korean court. He needed a different play. He contacted Min-soo again. "I have her voice. She predicted the setup. I need you to take this public, not through the courts, through the news." Min-soo was silent for a long moment. "If I publish this, they'll come for you. They'll have you arrested for evidence tampering, for obstruction, for anything they can invent." "I know," Park said, "but they'll have to do it in the light, and the story will be out there. The transfer to Jeju won't happen quietly. The world will be watching." The following morning, Min-soo published the story. It ran with the headline, "The Voice in the Prison, Did a Heroine Save a Warden Only to be Silenced?" It included excerpts from the audio memo, the bank records linking Dyke to Hanwon Mineral, and the suspicious visitor log. It stopped short of naming Prosecutor Choi directly, but the dots were there for anyone to connect. The explosion was instantaneous. The national news picked it up. International human rights groups demanded a review. Han1 Minerals' stock price plummeted. The Ministry of Justice announced a full and impartial inquiry. Park was summoned to Seoul that afternoon. He walked into a conference room at the ministry to find three stern-faced officials, and sitting quietly in the corner, Prosecutor Choi. The lead official, a deputy minister, began. "Warden Park, you are suspended, effective immediately, pending investigation into gross misconduct, violation of prisoner confidentiality, and theft of state evidence. You will surrender your credentials." Park said nothing. He looked at Choi, who gave a faint, cold smile. This was the play: discredit the whistleblower, bury the story under procedure. Then the deputy minister's phone buzzed. He looked at it, his face draining of color. He listened, muttered, "I understand," and hung up. He looked at Park with new, uneasy eyes. "That was the Blue House," he said, referring to the presidential office. "The president's senior secretary for civil affairs has taken a personal interest. They have requested all files. They are forming a special investigative panel. You are to return to Dongbu Correctional and maintain your post until further notice. The inmate transfer is cancelled." Prosecutor Choi's smile vanished. The ground had just shifted. The story had reached the highest level. It was too big to squash quietly. Park returned to the prison a different man. He was still the warden, but he was now a marked man in a system that hated marks. That evening, as he walked to his car, a black sedan pulled up. The window rolled down. It was Choi. "You think you've won, Warden? You've only made the end messier. That woman will never see freedom. And you will be remembered as the fool who broke the rules for a convict." The window rolled up, and the car sped away. Park stood alone in the parking lot. The victory felt hollow and terrifying. He had forced the dragon into the open, but now it was staring right at him. He had saved Amara from a quiet death on Jeju, only to place her at the center of a very public, very dangerous war. And he had just made himself the primary target. The special panel was coming, but so was the backlash. And in a prison filled with corrupt guards and angry gangs, he had just painted a target on his own back and on hers. The real riot was about to begin. The special investigative panel arrived at Dongbu not as bureaucrats, but as a siege unit. They sealed records, interviewed guards, and sequestered Sergeant Kim within an hour. For 3 days, the prison held its breath. Warden Park was sidelined but present, a ghost in his own office. Amara remained in the medical wing, now under the guard of 2 stoic officers from the National Police, not the prison service. The walls were closing in, but now, for the first time, they were the right walls. On the 4th day, the panel's lead investigator, a stern woman named Inspector Kang, summoned Park. She played him a recording from their interview with Sergeant Kim. His voice, stripped of its bravado, was a thin whine. "It was just money, 50,000 won to look the other way on the gate." Prosecutor Choi's assistant, he said it was just a stress test of security, a drill. "I didn't know about the riot." Then a damning pause. He said, "If I helped, there'd be a promotion after." After the inmate was transferred. The conspiracy now had a voice inside the prison. Sergeant Kim's testimony, given in exchange for a reduced sentence on corruption charges, directly implicated the prosecutor's office in enabling the riot that nearly killed the warden. It was no longer about Amara's past. It was about an active plot to subvert a state institution. Inspector Kang looked at Park. "The audio recording from the inmate's personal device. We have verified its authenticity. It was created before her arrest. It changes everything, but we need the original weapon, the gun she was convicted with. It was entered into evidence at the Seoul Central Court's repository." Park's heart sank. If Prosecutor Choi is involved, that evidence could be lost. "It was," Inspector Kang said flatly. "The log shows it was checked out for re-examination by an assistant from Choi's office 6 months ago. Never returned. The chain of custody is broken. Without the weapon, our forensic team can't retest it, can't prove it was planted." It was a masterstroke. They could have the testimony, the financial links, the motive, but without the murder weapon to disprove, the original conviction technically stood on its one piece of physical evidence. The panel was building a case for a massive corruption scandal, but not necessarily for Amara's innocence. They could expose the conspirators while leaving her in prison. The loophole was cruel and brilliant. Park returned to Amara's cell. He told her about the gun. She listened, her face impassive. Then she asked a simple question. The serial number from the destroyed batch. Did your journalist friend get the full list from the Nigerian armory? He hadn't. He called Minsu immediately. Minsu called his contact in Abuja. The answer came back in 2 hours. The Nigerian military, deeply embarrassed by Colonel Dyke's exposed corruption, was now fully cooperating. They transmitted not just the list, but the digital scan of the destruction log. Every gun was accounted for, with photographs of their melted frames. Except one. The serial number on the gun Amara was convicted with had indeed been logged as destroyed. But the photograph in the log was blurry, almost intentionally so. It's a duplicate, Amara said, understanding dawning. They took a serial number from a destroyed weapon and stamped it on a different gun. The gun they gave me, so the records would show it was destroyed, untraceable. But the real destroyed gun and the fake gun are two different objects. Which means, Park said, the adrenaline surging, if we find the real destroyed gun, the one in the photograph. You prove my gun was a copy, a plant. She leaned forward, her eyes alight. The destroyed weapons, they would have been sold for scrap to a licensed metal recycler. The investigation pivoted. With the Nigerian government's help, they traced the contractor who handled the destroyed weapons, a company in Lagos. Inspector Kang, using diplomatic channels, requested access to their salvage records. It was a long shot. A mountain of melted metal 2 years later. But they got a hit. One serial number from the batch had been recovered not by the recycler, but by a different vendor, a private security equipment company based in Seoul, a subsidiary of Hanwon Mineral. The records showed the item was purchased as decommissioned training hardware. The serial number matched Amara's gun, the real one. Inspector Kang obtained a raid warrant. In a warehouse on the outskirts of Seoul, they found a crate of decommissioned weapons, all legally purchased. Among them, a pistol with its serial number filed off. But when scanned with a forensic laser, the original number was still readable in the metal's crystalline structure. It was the gun from the destruction log, the real gun. It had never left Nigeria. It had been shipped to Korea as scrap and stored. The fake gun, the one with Amara's prints, had never existed in any official ledger until it appeared in her hand. The physical evidence of her guilt was now the physical evidence of the frame-up. The panel moved swiftly. Prosecutor Choi was arrested at his office on charges of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit grievous bodily harm. Colonel Dyke was detained in Dubai on an Interpol warrant, facing extradition to Nigeria. The CEO of Hanwon Mineral resigned, and the company was placed under a special audit. The legal machinery for Amara's release was complex. Her conviction was vacated, but she wasn't simply free. She was in administrative limbo, a person wrongfully imprisoned by a foreign state, her visa status void, her life in tatters. The Korean government, eager to contain the scandal, offered a quiet settlement, a formal apology, financial compensation, and deportation within 72 hours. They wanted the story to end with her on a plane. Park went to her holding room, now in a government facility, not a prison. "They're sending you back," he said. "I know," she replied. She was wearing civilian clothes for the first time in 2 years. They hung loosely on her frame. "It is the easiest path for them." "It's not justice. Justice is a clean record. It is my name cleared. It is the men who did this in chains. The rest," she looked out the window, "the rest is geography." He had expected fury, or at least bitterness. He found only a profound exhaustion. She had fought her war, and she had won the only battle that mattered, the truth. Now she just wanted to stop fighting. But Park couldn't. He had stood in the chasm. He had seen the gears of the system from the inside. He requested a meeting with Inspector Kang and a senior official from the Ministry of Justice. He laid out a new proposal. Deportation is an admission of guilt, her guilt. It says Korea made a mistake it wants to sweep away. Instead, offer her asylum, on grounds of political persecution. The conspiracy against her was, by definition, political. Grant her residency. Let her choose to stay or go. The officials balked. It was unprecedented. It would keep the story alive. Then Inspector Kang spoke. "He's right. We broke the system to find the truth. Offering her the bus ticket home is using the same broken system to hide the cost. If we believe in the correction, we must bear the visible consequence. A week later, Amara Oak stood before a judge for the final time, not as a defendant, but as a petitioner. The state formally renounced its prosecution. Her life sentence was erased. Immediately after, her lawyer submitted an application for asylum, which was fast-tracked and approved. She was given a temporary residence permit and a modest stipend from the compensation fund. She moved into a small apartment in Seoul, provided by a victims' advocacy group. Park visited her there. The space was bare, but light filled the living room. She was brewing tea. "What will you do?" he asked. "I do not know," she said. "I was a protector. It is all I know, but I cannot do that here." She handed him a cup. "And you, they will not let you return to Dongbu." He nodded. He had resigned. The ministry had offered him a desk job, a quiet posting. He had refused. "I'm testifying at all the trials. Choi's, the Hanwon executives. Then I think I will write about clocks and how to fix them when they're designed to tell the wrong time." A faint smile touched her lips, the first he had ever seen. "That is a good thing." The final surprising detail emerged not in court, but in a handwritten letter delivered to Amara a month later. It was from Sergeant Ju. He had left the prison service and entered the police academy. He wrote, "You showed me that a uniform is not a cage. It is a choice. Every day I choose to be the guard who slips the note, not the one who takes the money. Thank you for my choice." On a Tuesday afternoon, Park met Amara in a public park near the Han River. The spring sun was warm. They walked in silence for a while, two people bound by a violence they had survived. "You never asked me," Park said finally, "why I finally believed you, that day in the infirmary." "You needed to," she said. "It was in your eyes, the same look I saw in the corridor when you had no way out, the realization that the story you were told was wrong." He stopped walking. "I lost my voice," he said, remembering the title of this entire saga. "When you pushed off that wall, I opened my mouth to yell to order you to stop, and no sound came out. I was the warden, and I was utterly silent." She looked at him, the river light in her eyes. "Sometimes," she said, "the most powerful thing a man can do is listen to his own silence." He nodded, the last piece of his own tension releasing. They continued their walk, not as warden and inmate, not as protector and protected, but as two survivors of the same storm, finally on steady ground. The story was public. The corrupt were facing judgment. The wrong was being righted slowly, imperfectly. It was not a fairy tale. It was justice. And for them, for now, that was enough. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in a long time, it was their own. The riot at Dongbu Correctional was contained in 47 minutes, but the tremor it sent through the foundations of power lasted for years. The trials of Prosecutor Choi and the Hanwon executives became a national spectacle, a textbook case of corporate judicial corruption. Colonel Dyke was extradited to Nigeria and sentenced to life in a maximum security facility of his own. The system, when finally forced to look at itself, did what systems rarely do: it excised its own infection. But this story was never just about the fall of corrupt men. It was about the rise of two unexpected allies. Park Young-hwan never returned to corrections. He became a consultant for prison reform, using his knowledge of the clock's mechanics to propose better designs. He sees his daughter on weekends. They never speak about the threats, only about the future. Amara Oak's asylum became permanent residency. She was offered a position by a private security firm, but she declined. Instead, she works with an NGO that assists wrongfully convicted foreigners, using her first-hand understanding of the labyrinth to guide others out. She and Park meet for coffee once a month. They talk about books, not prisons. The documented cases of inmates saving guards are rare, but they happen. They are flashes of humanity in engineered darkness. What makes this story singular is what happened next. The guard chose to save the inmate back, not with his body, but with his entire career, his safety, his silence. He listened to the truth everyone else had been paid to ignore. Some people wait their whole lives for permission to do the right thing. Amara didn't wait. She saw a man about to die and she moved. Park didn't wait. He saw a truth about to be buried and he dug. In the end, they weren't a warden and a prisoner. They were two people who found their voices in the chaos, one through action, the other through listening, and in doing so, they gave each other a freedom no court could ever grant. The prison still stands, the gears still turn, but sometimes the most powerful correction isn't made to the inmate. It's made to the conscience of the man who holds the key, and that is a sentence that can never be overturned. If you found this story of courage against impossible odds compelling, make sure to subscribe. We uncover hidden narratives like this every week. Until next time, stay aware and stay curious.